I never thought I'd end up working as a night watchman at a library, but after months of unemployment, I wasn't in a position to be picky. The ad in the paper was simple: night security, Blackwood Public Library. Quiet work, good pay, must be comfortable working alone. It seemed perfect for someone like me, who preferred solitude and didn't mind odd hours. The Blackwood Public Library was an imposing brick building that dated back to 1889, complete with tall, arched windows and Gothic Revival architecture that made it look more like a cathedral than a place to check out books. It sat on the corner of Elm and 3rd Street, surrounded by old oak trees that cast long shadows across the building even during the day. My interview was with Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She showed me around the building during the day, 3 floors of books, reading rooms, and study areas. The basement housed archives and storage, while the 3rd floor contained rare books and special collections. Your job is simple, she explained as we walked through the main reading room. Lock up at closing, do hourly rounds, and make sure nothing is disturbed. The building is old, so you'll hear settling noises, creaking, normal things. Don't let it bother you. She paused near the circulation desk, her expression growing more serious. There are a few specific protocols you need to follow. Some of our patrons are particular about their privacy. I raised an eyebrow. Patrons? But you close at 8 p.m. Yes, well, she cleared her throat uncomfortably. Sometimes people stay late. Research projects, you understand. If you encounter anyone after hours, don't disturb them. Just note it in your log and continue your rounds. It seemed odd, but the pay was better than anything else I'd found, so I agreed to start the following Monday. My first week was uneventful. I'd arrive at 9 p.m., do my rounds every hour, and spend the rest of the time reading or listening to podcasts at the security desk. The building was peaceful at night, just the hum of heating systems and the occasional settling creaks Mrs. Chen had warned me about. It was during my second week that things started to feel different. I was doing my 2 a.m. round when I heard it, the soft sound of pages turning, coming from the 2nd floor. I climbed the stairs quietly, my flashlight sweeping across the rows of bookshelves. The sound continued, steady and rhythmic, like someone reading at a leisurely pace. I followed the sound to the literature section and found an elderly man sitting at one of the reading tables. He was well dressed, in an old-fashioned suit, with a book open in front of him. A small reading lamp illuminated his work area. Strange, since I was sure all the lights had been turned off. "Excuse me, sir," I said softly. "The library is closed. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man looked up, and I was struck by how pale he was, almost translucent in the lamplight. His eyes were a startling blue, but there was something vacant about them, as if he was looking through me rather than at me. "Just finishing this chapter," he said, in a voice like rustling paper. "Won't be much longer." I remembered Mrs. Chen's instructions about not disturbing the late patrons. "All right, but please make sure to lock up when you leave." He nodded and returned to his book. I continued my round, but when I came back 20 minutes later, both the man and the reading lamp were gone. The table was empty, as if no one had ever been there. The next night, I found a different patron, a woman in a 1920s dress, sitting in the poetry section with a book of Emily Dickinson poems. She gave me the same vacant stare when I approached, the same promise to leave soon. Like the night before, she was gone when I returned. By the end of my second week, I'd encountered 5 different late patrons, all dressed in clothing from different eras, all reading quietly in the dim light of lamps that shouldn't have been working. I dutifully noted each encounter in my log, as Mrs. Chen had instructed. On Friday night, as I was preparing to leave, Mrs. Chen arrived early for the morning shift. She looked tired, older than I remembered from my interview. "How are the night shifts going?" she asked, settling behind the circulation desk. "Fine," I said, then hesitated. "Though I've been encountering those late patrons you mentioned. They're unusual." Mrs. Chen's expression grew guarded. "Unusual how?" "They dress strangely, old-fashioned clothes, and they're very pale, almost—" I struggled for the right word. "They don't seem entirely there." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, then opened her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. I was hoping it wouldn't be necessary, but... She handed me the envelope. These are additional guidelines, for your safety and theirs. I opened the envelope and found a typewritten sheet. Special protocols for night security, Blackwood Public Library. If you encounter patrons after hours, do not attempt to check them out books. They have their own arrangements. Never blow out their reading lamps or turn off their lights. They will leave when they're finished. If a patron asks you to find a specific book, politely decline. Tell them you're not familiar with the catalog system. Do not make noise in the rare books room on the 3rd floor between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. This is their quiet time. If you see children in the children's section after midnight, do not approach them. They are looking for something they lost long ago. The basement archives are off limits between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Do not go downstairs during this time, regardless of what you hear. If someone asks you what year it is, answer honestly. Do not ask them the same question. Never sit in the chair by the fireplace in the main reading room. It's occupied, even when it appears empty. If the card catalog drawers start opening and closing on their own, leave the area immediately and wait in your office until it stops. Under no circumstances should you shelve any books you find left on tables. Leave them exactly where they are. I stared at the list, a chill running down my spine. Mrs. Chen, what exactly is going on here? She folded her hands on the desk, looking every one of her 60-odd years. Blackwood Library has been serving this community for over a century. Some patrons have been coming here for a very long time, longer than you might expect. She met my eyes. They're not harmful, just persistent in their habits. These guidelines help ensure everyone can coexist peacefully. Are you telling me this library is haunted? I'm telling you that knowledge doesn't die easily, she said carefully. Some people love this place so much in life that they couldn't bear to leave it in death. They're not ghosts in the traditional sense, they're echoes. Imprints of people who spent so much time here that part of them became embedded in the building itself. I thought about the pale patrons I'd encountered, their vacant stares, their old-fashioned clothing. How many are there? We're not sure. The building keeps its own records. She stood to leave. Follow those guidelines and you'll be fine. They're actually quite pleasant once you get used to them. Armed with the new rules, my 3rd week took on a different character. I began to recognize some of the regular patrons. The elderly man in the suit, Professor Whitmore, according to the nameplate that sometimes appeared on his table. The woman in the 1920s dress, she seemed drawn to poetry and romance novels, and several others. They nodded politely when our paths crossed, but never initiated conversation beyond their standard, just finishing this chapter responses. I learned to simply acknowledge them and move on, leaving them to their eternal reading. The children were different. I first encountered them on a Tuesday night around 12:30 a.m. I was doing my midnight round when I heard whispers coming from the children's section. Soft, excited voices, like kids sharing secrets. I found 3 of them, 2 girls and a boy, all appearing to be around 8 or 9 years old. They were dressed in clothes from what looked like the 1940s or 1950s, and they were frantically searching through the picture books, pulling volumes from the shelves and stacking them on the floor. "Have you seen it?" one of the girls asked when she noticed me. Her voice had the same paper-thin quality as the adult patrons. "We can't find our book." "What book are you looking for?" I asked, despite rule number 3 about not helping them find books. "The one with the dragon," the boy said. "We were reading it when the fire started, and we never got to see how it ended." A chill ran through me. I remembered reading about a fire at the library in 1953. 3 children had died in the blaze, trapped in the children's section when part of the roof collapsed. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I don't know where that book might be." The children looked disappointed but not surprised. They continued their search and I left them to it, my heart heavy with the sadness of their situation. It was during my 4th week that I encountered my first real problem. I was doing my 3 a.m. round when I heard a commotion coming from the rare books room on the 3rd floor. This was during the supposed quiet time mentioned in the guidelines, so I should have stayed away, but the noise was loud enough to be concerning. Books falling, furniture scraping against the floor. I climbed to the 3rd floor and approached the rare books room carefully. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see books flying off the shelves, pages scattered across the floor. In the center of the chaos stood a man I hadn't seen before, younger than the usual patrons, maybe in his 30s, dressed in a suit from the 1960s. Unlike the others, he seemed agitated, almost frantic. He was pulling books from the shelves and throwing them aside, clearly searching for something specific. "Where is it?" he muttered. "Where is it? I know it's here." I remembered rule number 4 about not making noise during quiet time, but this was beyond normal patron behavior. I pushed the door open slightly. "Excuse me, sir, is everything all right?" He spun around, and I immediately knew something was wrong. His eyes weren't vacant like the others. They were wild, desperate, and when he looked at me, I felt a wave of cold that nearly knocked me over. "You!" he snarled. "You're one of them. You're keeping it from me." He started toward me, and I backed away quickly. Unlike the other patrons, this one felt dangerous, unpredictable. "I'm just the night watchman," I said, continuing to back toward the stairs. "I don't know what you're looking for." "The manuscript," he shouted. "My life's work. They took it from me, but I know it's here. I can feel it." I reached the stairs and started down, but I could hear him following, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the wooden floors. I made it to the second floor before I felt a hand grab my shoulder. The touch was like ice, so cold it burned. I spun around to face him, and up close, I could see that he was different from the other patrons. Where they seemed like faded photographs, he was sharp, vivid, angry. "Give it back," he demanded. "I don't have anything of yours," I protested. That's when I heard another voice, calm, authoritative. "Thomas, that's enough." I turned to see Professor Whitmore standing at the end of the hallway, his usual reading lamp somehow casting light even though it wasn't plugged into anything. "She took it, Harold," the angry spirit said to Whitmore. "The librarian took my manuscript, and now they're all conspiring to keep it from me." "Thomas," Whitmore said patiently, "you've been searching for that manuscript for 60 years. Perhaps it's time to accept that some things are lost." "Never," Thomas snarled. He turned back to me. "You'll help me find it, or nothing," Whitmore interrupted firmly. "This young man is under our protection. He follows the rules, respects our space. You will not threaten him." Other patrons began to appear, the woman in the 1920s dress, an older woman I'd seen in the biography section, a man in a Victorian-era coat. They formed a loose circle around Thomas, their pale faces unified in disapproval. Thomas looked around at them, his anger slowly deflating into defeat. "I just want my work back," he said quietly. "I know," Whitmore said gently, "but terrorizing the staff won't accomplish that. Return to your research. If the manuscript is here, you'll find it eventually." Thomas nodded reluctantly and walked back toward the stairs, his footsteps growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Whitmore turned to me. "My apologies. Thomas is new to this state of existence. He hasn't yet learned to accept the limitations." "What happened to him?" I asked. "Heart attack, back in 1962. He was a researcher, spent most of his time in the archives. When he died, he was convinced his life's work, a manuscript about local history, had been stolen. He's been searching for it ever since. Has anyone tried to help him find it?" Whitmore smiled sadly. "The manuscript was published posthumously in 1963. It's in the local history collection, but Thomas can't see it. He's so focused on the loss that he can't recognize what he's looking for, even when it's right in front of him." The other patrons began to disperse, returning to their reading. Whitmore lingered for a moment. "You handled that well," he said. "Most living people would have run." "Are you going to tell me what happened to you?" I asked. "Literature professor at the college," he said. "Spent my retirement years here, reading everything I'd never had time for during my teaching career. When my time came, I simply stayed. There's always another book to read, another story to discover." He began to walk away, then paused. The children found their book, by the way. It was misfiled in the fairy tale section. They finished it last week. They seem much happier now. Over the following weeks, I settled into a comfortable routine with the library's permanent residents. I learned their habits, their preferred sections, their quirks. Professor Whitmore often left book recommendations on my desk, always excellent choices. The woman in the 1920s dress, I learned her name was Eleanor, had impeccable taste in poetry. The Victorian gentleman was working his way through the entire science section, apparently trying to catch up on a century of progress. The children were different after finding their book. They still appeared occasionally, but now they seemed to be exploring rather than searching, discovering stories they'd never had the chance to read. Even Thomas calmed down, though he continued his fruitless search through the archives. I started leaving subtle hints, placing local history books in visible locations, opening the card catalog to relevant entries. He never seemed to notice, but I kept trying. It was during my 8th week that Mrs. Chen called me into her office. "How are you adjusting to the night shift?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. "Your patrons are quite respectful," she smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. We've had some security guards who didn't adapt well to the situation." "What happened to them?" "Nothing dramatic. They usually quit after a few encounters. It takes a special person to work comfortably with our extended community." She leaned back in her chair. "I'm curious, have you noticed anything unusual lately? Changes in behavior? New faces?" I thought about it. Actually, yes. There's been a woman in the genealogy section. I haven't seen her before, and she seems different from the others. Mrs. Chen's expression grew concerned. Different how? She's not pale like the others. She looks almost solid, real. And when she looks at me, her eyes aren't vacant. They're sharp, aware. "Can you describe her?" "Middle-aged, dark hair, wearing a blue dress that looks modern. She's been there every night this week, going through the genealogy records." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "I think you may have encountered someone who's still alive." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes, people with strong psychic sensitivity are drawn to places like this. They're not ghosts, but they're able to project themselves, especially during deep sleep or meditation. If she's researching genealogy, she might be trying to connect with ancestors who spent time here. Is that dangerous?" "Not usually, but it can be confusing for everyone involved. She might not even realize she's projecting. If you see her again, try talking to her. Ask her name, what she's looking for. If she's a living person, she'll respond normally. If she's something else," Mrs. Chen shrugged, "well, you'll know." That night, I found the woman exactly where she'd been all week, hunched over genealogy records in the local history section. As I approached, she looked up, and I was struck again by how solid, how present she seemed compared to the other patrons. "Good evening," I said. "I'm Mike, the night security guard. I don't think we've been properly introduced." She blinked, looking confused for a moment. "I'm Sarah," she said slowly. "Sarah Mitchell. I'm researching my family history." "Are you finding what you're looking for?" "I think so. My great-grandmother used to spend a lot of time here. I'm trying to trace her research, understand what she was working on." She looked around the library, frowning. "This is going to sound strange, but I keep having the most vivid dreams about this place, almost like I'm actually here." "What do you remember from these dreams?" "Everything. The smell of old books, the sound of pages turning, even conversations with other researchers." She laughed nervously. "My doctor says it's just stress, but they feel so real." I realized Mrs. Chen had been right. Sarah was projecting herself here during sleep, drawn by her connection to her great-grandmother's research. "Sarah," I said gently, "what time is it where you are right now?" She looked at me strangely. "What do you mean? It's..." She checked her watch and frowned. "That can't be right. It says 3 a.m., but I was just having dinner." "I think you might be dreaming right now," I said carefully. "But you're somehow projecting yourself here, to the library. It's not uncommon for people with strong family connections to this place." She stared at me, then looked around the library with new awareness. "The other people I've seen here, the ones in old-fashioned clothes, are they..." "Permanent residents," I confirmed. "They love this place so much in life that they stayed after death." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "My great-grandmother. Is she here?" "I don't know. What was her name?" "Margaret Whitmore." I felt a chill of recognition. "Professor Whitmore's wife? You know her?" Before I could answer, Professor Whitmore himself appeared at the end of the aisle, his reading lamp casting its familiar warm glow. "Margaret?" he said softly, approaching slowly. "Is that really you, my dear?" Sarah, or rather the projection of Sarah, turned toward him, and her face lit up with recognition. "Grandfather Harold? But you've been dead for 20 years. Time works differently here, he said, moving closer. I've been waiting, hoping you'd find your way back to us. They embraced, and I watched in amazement as Sarah seemed to become more solid, more real, while Professor Whitmore appeared less ghostly, more human. I've been trying to understand your research, Sarah said. The genealogy work you and Grandmother Margaret were doing together. Ah, yes, Professor Whitmore smiled. We were tracing the connection between local families and the original founders of the library. Your family line goes back to one of the founding members. That's why you're able to be here like this. They talked for another hour, sharing memories, catching up on decades of separation. Finally, Sarah began to fade, becoming translucent like the other patrons. I'm waking up, she said, but I can come back, can't I? Whenever you need to, Professor Whitmore assured her. The library will always be here for family. After she disappeared, Professor Whitmore turned to me. Thank you for helping her understand. Not everyone would have handled that situation so well. Is she really your granddaughter? Great-granddaughter, actually. Margaret and I never had children of our own, but we mentored many young researchers over the years. Sarah's great-grandmother was like a daughter to us. He paused. It's good to know the connection continues. My time at Blackwood Library has stretched into months now. I've become something of a liaison between the living and the extended community. Mrs. Chen has started sending researchers to me when they need help with historical projects. Apparently, I have access to the most knowledgeable local history experts in the city. The library feels like home now. I've grown fond of my unusual colleagues, and they seem to accept me as part of their eternal reading circle. Professor Whitmore still leaves book recommendations on my desk. Eleanor has introduced me to poets I'd never heard of. Even Thomas has warmed up to me, though he's still searching for his manuscript. Last week, I had an idea. I went to the local history section and pulled Thomas's published manuscript, the one he can't see because he's so focused on the loss. Instead of leaving it where he might find it, I had it photocopied and bound with a plain cover, no title page, no author attribution. I left it on a table in the archives with a note, found this manuscript in the old files. Thought you might find it interesting. M. The next morning, the manuscript was gone. That night, I found Thomas in the reading room, hunched over the photocopied pages, reading intently. Fascinating work, he said when he noticed me. Someone really understood the local history. Whoever wrote this knew their subject intimately. Any idea who the author might be? I asked innocently. No, but they were brilliant. This is exactly the kind of research I was trying to do before He trailed off, looking confused for a moment, then shook his head. Well, before I came here. He's been reading it every night since, completely absorbed in his own work without realizing it. I think he's finally at peace, even if he doesn't understand why. The library keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its people. In a world where everything changes so fast, there's something comforting about a place where time moves differently, where knowledge is preserved not just in books, but in the souls of those who loved learning enough to stay forever. I've learned that some jobs are more than just employment, they're callings. And sometimes, the best colleagues are the ones who've dedicated their entire existence to the work they love. Mrs. Chen asked me last week if I ever planned to leave. I told her I'd think about it, but honestly, I can't imagine working anywhere else. After all, where else would I find co-workers with this much experience? Some of them have been perfecting their craft for over a century. You can't get that kind of expertise anywhere else. And who knows? Maybe someday, when my time comes, I'll just stay. There are always more books to read, more stories to discover. The library has room for one more permanent resident. It feels like home.